Hi, this is Megan Hill Sunday, and this is a new strategy for social justice using social technologies to enhance strategy planning and increase impact. My experience, I've been working in nonprofits for over 10 years. You can see here, these are some of the organizations that I've been working for. I've worked for fighting against hunger in Montana. I've worked with seniors. I have been working for people with disabilities. Um, I have been very passionate about volunteer management programs. I believe that volunteers are a nonprofit's greatest asset if you know how to use them. And I'm currently working for Special Olympics Montana with the Unified Champion Schools program and uh, pursuing my graduate degree in measurement and evaluation with American University. But enough about me. Today I am here to talk to you about how to use social technologies to improve your strategy planning process. In my Special Olympics world, I took a look at the Special Olympics North America's model for strategy planning with the different regionally accredited programs, or otherwise known as the state Special Olympics programs here in the US. And from my experience with Special Olympics Montana, I saw that some of these regionally accredited programs have a lot to manage with their stakeholders, and we have a really unique view of our campaign, of our movement, and we really are a very powerful social justice organization. So I wanted to talk about how we can use social media and social technologies to improve our engagement with stakeholders and our strategy planning process. So I recommend that Special Olympics regionally accredited programs adopt social technologies such as crowdsourcing and predictive market analysis, specifically Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and Rate Solutions Mutual Fund for their strategy planning. This will result in significant increased stakeholder engagement, moderate increased knowledge of stakeholder challenges, and moderate increased timeline for strategy planning process. Even though it will increase the time required for strategy planning, the return on investment is well worth the time. So Special Olympics programs provide year-round training and competition in sports for children and adults with intellectual disabilities. And they do this to help people with intellectual disabilities create physical fitness, so that they can push themselves to try new things. And when they do that, they experience some joy, and they can then share that with their friends and family and community. And they do all of this year round with a volunteer board of directors, thousands of volunteers, and they do all of this with like maybe 10 to 30 staff. There may be some organizations that have more than 30 staff, but those are definitely outliers. And there are about 2,000 to 20,000 athletes in these regionally accredited programs, and obviously countless private donors, sponsors, and community supporters. In the Special Olympics movement, there's a lot of pride in the fact that there's very few staff and a lot of stakeholders. So there's pride, but it's also a struggle at the same time. And you'll hear it often that it's athlete-centered, family-based, and volunteer-driven and sponsor-supported, meaning that this little red icon or red logo here in the center, you could say that represents staff. They're sort of holding onto the kite strings of the stakeholders. They're not by any means the center. They are just this piece that's trying to hold everything else together. When we look at the analysis of Special Olympics and these regionally accredited programs, we see that some of the strengths is that they're highly visible, they're well known, they're celebrating the organization itself is celebrating its 50th year. And some of these regionally accredited programs, if they're not celebrating their 50th year, they are about to probably in the next few years. It's also a great return on investment for stakeholders. There's a great intrinsic value in becoming a volunteer with Special Olympics. You volunteer for Special Olympics, you show up at a Special Olympics event, and you immediately feel pretty good. You join Special Olympics as an athlete, and there's a pretty good chance that you'll see some improvements quickly. Some weaknesses, because the organization's grown so quickly over the past several years, and there's a greater focus on sport development, we do hear that it's becoming a bit more impersonal, that the events are becoming large, that it's kind of unorganized, and there is some issue with volunteer and athlete retention that has to do with athletes aging out, with volunteers being overwhelmed with the amount of work that they have to do, and then obviously high staff turnover and burnout. Some opportunities that there might be some social technology that can engage more stakeholders in the organizational activities, and it would help us gain a greater understanding of needs and improve retention and recruit new stakeholders, and engage staff in meaningful strategy planning. Some of the threats to this would be that regional programs might resist some social technologies or adopting new strategy planning processes. Stakeholders might resist change. Everybody might resist change. And then, of course, time and money are always an issue. Looking at some of the new social technologies when we think about strategy planning, crowdsourcing and prediction markets are two that really stood out. So according to Gartner's IT glossary, crowdsourcing describes the process for sourcing a task or challenge to a broad distributed set of contributors using the web and social collaboration techniques. Crowdsourcing applications typically include mechanisms to attract the desired participants, stimulate relevant contributions, and select winning ideas or solutions. And prediction markets, on the other hand, were based on, they were developed so that organizations can use them internally for staff or anyone with a license to create a voting or stock market system to determine the popularity or potential success rate of a program or idea. This tool allows anyone within an organization to weigh in with their opinion on various aspects of ideas and programs in a safe, game-like atmosphere, giving the organization feedback it might not receive in a more traditional setting. Some of the vendors for crowdsourcing are Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Instagram is great for crowdsourcing by creating collaboration through the use of hashtags. Everybody knows hashtags. And it also has a new feature with stories and polling, which is a great way to engage your stakeholders. Some organizations that are using Instagram for crowdsourcing and doing a great job are PETA, St. Baldrick's Foundation, the Humane Society, and Charity Water. Facebook is a little bit more in depth. You can actually have conversations with your stakeholders, get a little bit more intimate with them. You can bring them into discussion groups, and you can engage them in different activities, challenges, contests, etc. Twitter, really much more straightforward and short. Keep it simple, keep it sweet. You can ask your stakeholders questions, you can have them retweet questions, you can circulate questions and answers by using hashtags. But you can have a really far reach if you're using all three of these. You can also just pick one. But using these three to reach different demographics, and there's lots of fun tools out there and ways to learn how each different social media tool reaches different demographics. So that's a different conversation. Another vendor is for the predictive market, and one of the best tools and vendors I found out there was Right Solutions. So Right Solutions is a software company system that builds advanced mission critical software for the Department of Defense and first responders. Ooh, fancy. And they built this mutual fund program, and it creates players. So players being staff. You could even engage your volunteers in this process, board members, and each staff person enters into this program. They create a profile of their interest, expertise, what they're able to do, what they like to do, and then they sort of like a profile of their specific likes and desires, and then they can submit a project. And these projects, in the case of strategy planning, would have to do with a strategic initiative or a solution or an idea. And these could be things that are pulled from your crowdsourcing campaign for strategic initiatives. So they could be pulled from the field, they could be refined by your staff and then presented in this platform. Then the way the program works is your staff interact with the different ideas and the different ideas and projects, and the program creates an algorithm that dynamically derives the individual stock values, creating a system that brings different projects up on a leaderboard. And these predictions are very accurate in terms of which projects might actually succeed or be sustainable outside of the idea or outside of this brainstorming session. So pretty cool. It could save you some money. It could save you some meetings. It could give all of your staff an opportunity to have their voice be shared in the office. So let's look at the strategy planning process, sort of the tried and true way to do it. Each organization's a little bit different, but from what I understand or have seen, this was a pretty straightforward model. Step one is looking at the mission, vision, and goals and objectives. Sometimes the core values might be weaved in there. Step two is typically some type of scan of the environmental or climate or situation or state of the organization. And these might be in the form of a town hall meeting or listening sessions, meetings with staff, meeting with the board, just to kind of gain an understanding of what's going on and what needs to be addressed. And the next step is reviewing and updating your strategic goals. So where are you from the previous year? What's left undone? What worked? What didn't work? And then when you take step 2 and step 3 and combine them, then you come up with step 4, which is establishing your strategic objectives. And then step 5 is establishing your strategies to complete your objectives. and then you create your operational plans based on those. Step 6, you develop your annual plans based off of your operational planning, and then step 7, you look at the review of your execution, and then you go. And really this, there's probably more steps or less steps depending on your organization, but it always seems to work in this pattern. Where I'm looking to add pieces to strategy planning with social technologies is in this step 2, where you're really looking at that environmental scan. And the idea here is that sometimes when an executive or groups go out into the field, or they're meeting with staff and board members, they might have already jumped to step 3, where they've reviewed updates and strategic goals from the past strategic plan, or they're meeting with staff and board members that are sort of living in the now. And you think about meetings, or you think about annual reviews, and they say things like, you only remember information from the last 90 days. Well, that could also be true with your strategic planning process. And it's important to get the voices of all of your constituents, especially in your stakeholders, especially if you're working in a social justice organization. So how do you do that? You can go out to all these town hall meetings, and you wonder, do all the same people come to the same meetings every time, and are you getting a full representation? Are you getting the full sampling of all your stakeholders? Well, now with the help of social media, you can actually get a full sample, or a pretty darn close full sample of your stakeholders. So let's look at this new approach to strategy planning with social tech. You could do a step 2.1 where you begin crowdsourcing pre-campaign. So this could be a several-month process leading up to your strategic plan. Like, when it's coming, when your strategic plan needs to be renewed. So you could start these pre-campaigns looking at your different stakeholder groups and start some campaigns to try and build up those different groups through some social media campaigns to get them engaged. And this would result, some of the benefits to that would be, you'd increase your social media presence. You'd have, throughout this process, you may have some fundraisers that are starting, and you might actually be able to engage some of these stakeholders in some peer-to-peer fundraising. And you'll gain some greater immediate access to these stakeholders during that process. Then the next step would be that you would host an actual social media strategy planning campaign. So you would work with each of these stakeholder groups to ask them to contribute to your strategic plan. So you would look to each of these groups to contribute to a specific aspect of your strategic plan, or to give you feedback on what needs to be addressed. And then working with your staff, looking at how to prioritize those different requests and weeding out what's feasible and what's not. So this is going to actually give your stakeholders it's going to increase their engagement in the planning process itself. So they'll have some immediate buy-in to anything that is taken from their suggestions, and it's going to increase your knowledge, or the organization's knowledge, of the needs in the field, and it will allow the organization to prioritize potentially based on the frequency with which certain suggestions are made. So step 2.3 would be to engage staff in predictive market program development. So from some of these priorities that are derived from the field, then your staff would still have those suggestions and ideas from the 4th step that we saw back here. So these, or for step 3, review and update strategic goals. So you still may have some strategic goals that are in effect or incomplete, or things that you weren't able to get to or needed to be tweaked. And so you could incorporate all of these, and then staff can come together and use that predictive marketing market analysis tool, Mutual Fund, to put together some ideas, and it's essentially made the best project or best strategic initiative rise to the top or win, so that you're really bringing to the table the best strategic initiatives possible, and not just some that are built in a vacuum. So the major outcomes of incorporating social technology into your strategy planning is that it'll increase stakeholder engagement, it'll increase your social media presence, it'll increase knowledge of the stakeholder environment, and it will really give you greater capacity to mobilize your stakeholders at any given point. The implementation for this would be, as I suggested, the phase one would be about the pre-crowdsourcing campaigns. That might take about 3 months. Slow and steady. You'd have to identify your stakeholder groups, you'd have to identify your sampling sizes, and then you'd have to actually do it. Phase three, listening sessions and crowdsourcing strategy plans. I wouldn't omit actually going out into the field and meeting with your stakeholders, but I would add in the crowdsourcing strategy planning sessions, and then phase four would be putting those proposals together and using the predictive market tool, and then stage 5 would be putting the plan together, and phase 6 would be implementation. So risk management, some of the in the reading, some of the issues are pretty straightforward, but really interesting. So one of the biggest concerns was the fear of the feedback loop. So experts are saying this is one of the biggest challenges for organizations moving towards a more open channel between stakeholders and the direct planning process. Many times it's the middle management that struggles the most with this change, stating that they already know what feedback will be received from stakeholders. It's true that middle management will most likely receive the majority of feedback from stakeholders regarding any changes to the process and any results from the process. So it is imperative to the success that middle management is not only aware of the details, but also highly involved in the strategy planning process from the beginning until the end. So one of the biggest ways to address this risk is to engage middle management in the strategic planning process. They are essential to a good strategic plan. It doesn't happen at the top and it doesn't happen at the bottom. A good strategic plan really happens there in the middle. Risk 2, transparency and accountability. So in many cases, certain aspects of strategy planning are on a need-to-know basis. By involving stakeholders in the process this way, the organization can publicly address different issues in regard to why or why not, or why they're not able to move in one direction and not the other. And this type of transparency and accountability will lead to greater understanding and trust between the organization and the stakeholders. And as I mentioned earlier, yes, time constraints, of course. Adding social technologies to your strategy planning process will add some more time and maybe some more manpower, but the long-term benefits are worth the return on your investment. So some final thoughts. Social technology will make it easier to communicate with the masses. And as an organization who works to help advocate for others, like Special Olympics and other social justice organizations, you can use crowdsourcing and predictive markets to bring new voices and ideas to the forefront of your organization, not only from your stakeholders out in the field, but also within your organization and your staff. And the ability to mobilize highly engaged stakeholders through social media will lead to increased awareness and fundraising opportunities. So as a social justice organization like Special Olympics and working with people who may not be able to express themselves or have their voices heard as much as they'd like to. Being able to be that megaphone for them is amazing, and having a tool such as social media, which many people with intellectual disabilities are using, being able to hone in on that and use that form of communication to help be that megaphone for them is a great asset. So thank you very much, and I hope that you'll choose to incorporate social technology into your strategy planning process.